So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Simona Sankalaite. I'm a PhD student at KU Leuven. And today I would like to present a systematic review focused on interventions that aim to improve children's executive function and self-regulation by manipulating teacher-student interaction. So, as many of you already know, it is well documented that executive functions and self-regulation are essential in a number of domains, but are particularly important for academic achievement. And the EFSR skills are associated with better school adjustment, as seen in measures of academic ability and also teachers' perceptions for readiness for learning. And numerous studies consistently show that the EF and SR skills rapidly develop in preschool and continue to develop throughout childhood, with some domains even continuing to mature throughout adolescence and early adulthood. However, in general, EF and SR fail to develop to their full potential if the contextual stimulation is not adequately presented. Therefore, basically the focus has shifted a little bit in the recent years. So given the importance of EF and SR to children's academic outcomes and children's social and emotional development, there have been numerous attempts to improve these skills in preschool and primary school children. And the research suggests a number of diverse practices and programs for improving children's EF and SR. And generally, findings indicate that children with initially poorest executive function and self-regulation skills show the most improvement from any of this intervention. It is important to note that the majority of studies directly and exclusively targeted EFSR stimulation failed to report durable effects. Some training programs lack transferable results. For instance, training one EF component does not result in improving other cognitive components, and results fail to generalize to real-world behaviors. Other interventions produce short-term training-specific effects that, again, do not generalize to real-world behaviors. And therefore, this lack of transferable and durable effects might be attributed to such interventions teaching these specific skills out of context and ignoring potentially important contextual factors. Okay, has it changed? Oh, there's some delay a little bit in my screen. It is, sorry, I feel like there's some lag. Can you still see me and hear me? There's some pop-ups happening on my screen.
Yeah, we can see you and we can see the introduction slide.
Oh, still being here. Okay. Yeah, but that is fine. Okay. I feel like there was some lag. I'm sorry. Well, within this line of research, most studies have focused on the parent-child interaction mostly and home setting, and shown that positive interactions can support and promote the quality of executive function and self-regulation. And in order to add to the parenting effect, more recently, researchers shifted their attention to school and classroom environment, and specifically to teachers' role in promoting these cognitive skills. Children interact with teachers on the classroom level, so-called teacher-student interaction, and on the dyadic level, so-called teacher-student relationship. Regarding relationships between teacher and student at the classroom level, an important contribution was made by Hamre and Pienta, who introduced the teaching through interactions framework. And this framework places teacher-student interactions as a cornerstone for student learning. This proposed framework organizes TSI into 3 domains, so namely emotional support, instructional support, and classroom organization. And numerous observational studies have shown a correlation between the quality of TSI and children's EFSR skills. Despite the importance of TSI on EFSR performance, there is evidence that the benefits of a high quality TSI at the classroom level are conditional on children's individual relationships with their teachers. So regarding the relationships at the dyadic level, so individual level, attachment theory is most commonly referred to. And here the focus lies on the affective components of the relationship between teacher and specific student. So more specifically, closeness, conflict, and dependency. And this interest for TSR at the individual level emerged rather recently. However, it consistently indicates that a positive TSR and generally effective teacher behaviors are longitudinally associated with improved child's EFSR abilities. Also more engagement, also more profit from instruction, and so on. So even though previous studies already provide some indications on the role of TSI and TSR in the development of executive function and self-regulation, they are correlational in nature, and the causality question remains unanswered. So based on some gaps in the current research, the purpose of the current study was to provide an overview of the existing research on specifically on the interventions focusing on primary and preschool and primary school children's EF NSR performance with or without direct manipulation of TSI or TSR. Therefore, this systematic review aimed to assess whether school or class-wide interventions are effective and whether it depends on the type of manipulation, so dyadic versus classroom level, and also components being activated. So for instance, instructional versus emotional support. And also to compare and contrast the effects of these interventions on executive function and self-regulation and their distinct components. So we have applied a multi-model method search strategy to collect well, all peer-reviewed articles that are out there using free techniques. So searches in databases using various combinations of our key terms, forward and backward citation searching, and also checking gray literature for some unpublished or ongoing work. Basically, the selected studies had to include the preschool or primary school children, which generally corresponds to 3 to 12 years of age. They also, of course, had to include a measure of executive function or self-regulation, either pre and post-intervention or post-intervention measure for both experimental and control group. And also included studies had to incorporate an intervention in their study, either focusing on improving TSI, TSR, and as an effect EFSR, or directly improving EFSR. And basically, we also aimed for studies to be randomized controlled trials, or then at least applying a quasi-experimental design, or then if there's no control group, at least participants were assessed pre and post intervention. So the searches across all databases resulted in 2,800 unique articles. But after screening at the abstract and full text level, the database search resulted in the inclusion of 12 original studies. These were then used for backward and forward search, which resulted in additional 6 articles. And inquiries in gray literature for ongoing or unpublished work did not result in any additional studies. So of all the articles, 18 met the inclusion criteria and were reviewed. This is just an overview of the study characteristics of the included studies. I would just like to mention that all the included studies involved a manipulation of TSI and none of TSR. And 14 studies primarily focused on improving TSI as a primary outcome, and in turn, children's consequent EF-SR as a secondary outcome. And 4 studies focused on improving EF-SR outcome variables by providing teachers with some TSI strategies to be implemented in their teaching. Given the title and the focus of the study, all interventions can be broadly classified into 2 types. So the ones focusing on improving EF and their components, and those on improving self-regulation. So this is part of the results. In sum, the effect of instructional support on working memory ranged from no to positive effect. However, the positive effect was found in a very small sample study. It was only 4 students included, so the results should be interpreted carefully. Teachers' emotional support positively affected children's working memory, however, only in children considered most vulnerable. So, this was with children with poor parent-child relationship, for instance. Then for the instructional support on inhibitory control, it also ranged from no to a small positive effect. And finally, there was a small effect of instructional support on cognitive flexibility, but there was only 1 study that targeted this EF subcomponent. So for the self-regulation, all 3 types of TSI showed a small positive effect on children's overall self-regulation performance, with this effect being strongest in children scoring the lowest at baseline. So again, considered those most vulnerable. And the findings from 1 study indicate a small positive effect of classroom organization on children's attention regulation. For emotional regulation, teachers' instructional support did not result in an effect on children's performance. Teachers' classroom organization led to a small positive effect, which was again largest for the children at initial risk. Regarding behavioral regulation, teachers' emotional support ranged from no to a small indirect positive effect. This effect was found by teachers' emotional support improving teacher-student relationship, and in turn, children's behavior regulation. And the teachers' classroom organization did not result in any effect on children's behavior regulation. And finally, teachers' instructional support led to a small-sized effect in children at risk for emotional and behavioral disorders. So the first goal of this review was to assess the causal effect of TSI, TSR interventions on executive function, self-regulation, of EF-SR interventions with also an added manipulation of TSI. And even though all 3 types of TSI support seem to improve executive function and self-regulation in children, some differences are evident, obviously. So, for instance, emotional support only showed, at most a small effect, but it was also the type of support that was least extensively studied. Instructional support was most commonly used. It was, I think, 9 studies, and showed somewhat consistently a small positive effect of teacher support on children's EF-SR outcomes. Organizational support appeared to be most promising, although results are quite dispersed, ranging from no to a large positive effect. And only 1 study from those reviewed has employed 2 types of support in their intervention and reported no effect, so direct comparison was not possible. And like I mentioned before, somewhat surprisingly, no study manipulated TSR at the dyadic level. And out of all included, only 2 studies assessed teacher-student relationship and showed, like mentioned before, that improving TSI led to a higher quality of TSR, and then in turn in gains in children's EF-SR performance. However, based on previous research, this relationship between TSI and TSR is more likely to work in an opposite direction. So improving TSR on the dyadic level will lead to improved TSI on the classroom level. The second research goal was to compare and contrast the effects of these interventions for EF and SR and their distinct components, and in some, all targeted EF and SR components are potentially trainable and by these interventions by manipulating TSI. Self-regulation when compared to executive function seemed to be affected more strongly. However, again, more studies targeted self-regulation, so therefore might have led to somewhat inflated result. And regarding distinct subcomponents, no component appears to be most positively affected. And as I mentioned before, the strongest intervention effects were found for children who were considered vulnerable or disadvantaged. So these children included children from low socioeconomic backgrounds, children with poor parent-child relationships, and children with initially weakest EFSI skills. And these results are consistent with the literature of direct executive function self-regulation interventions, showing the highest gains for these groups. So overall, the current study provided an overview of research examining the causal effect between TSI and children's EFSR performance and show a positive effect of such interventions. So these findings indicate that teachers can effectively promote these important cognitive processes in children, and it further concludes that manipulating TSI is particularly important and beneficial for children considered vulnerable, suggesting that these cognitive deficits can be minimized if children are stimulated appropriately. However, due to high heterogeneity in concepts and operalization and the relatively small overall number of studies included, it was not possible to effectively compare the level of interaction, so TSI versus the TSR, types of support, for instance, instructional support versus classroom organization, and also different child characteristics like age and gender, through the means of meta regression. So what the current review highlights is that further research is needed to examine which specific teacher behaviors are important for which specific executive function and self-regulation subcomponents, and whether this is influenced by child, teacher, and maybe parent and family characteristics. Such insights can then further instruct the development and implementation of effective interventions in education. So that is the end of my presentation. Thank you all for your attention. I hope I didn't go much over scheduled time.